Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Watchung Booksellers Podcast, where we bring you conversations from our bookstore's vast community of book professionals who talk about what they do for the love of books. Thanks for joining us. I'm Marnie, and I'm here with my co-producer, Kathryn. Hello, Kathryn.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Marnie.
Hello. And this week, we're sharing a repeat episode just in time for the Montclair Literary Festival. In this episode, we heard from our friend and neighbor, Warren Zanes, and the fantastic New Jersey author, Tom Perrotta, whose new book, Ghost Town, releases next week.
They talked all about adaptations, as Warren's book, Deliver Me From Nowhere, had just been made into a film, and Tom has had multiple books adapted into film and television, including Election, Little Children, and The Leftovers. And in just a couple of weeks, on Saturday, May 2nd, you'll have a chance to see these two live in conversation to discuss Ghost Town at the Montclair Literary Festival. The ticket is $35 and comes with a signed copy of the book.
Before we roll it for you, in case you haven't heard, Watchung Booksellers has been chosen as Publishers Weekly Bookstore of the Year. We hope you'll come to celebrate with us this Saturday on Independent Bookstore Day.
We are also proud to be recognized for doing the work we do, and we're really excited to celebrate with you. It's going to be an extra special Independent Bookstore Day, and Marnie and I will be there once again to record our customers. This time, we are recording your personal haikus written about books, bookstores, and community.
Okay, let's get to the chat. Tom Perrotta is the author of 11 works of fiction, including Election and Little Children, both of which were made into Oscar-nominated films, and The Leftovers and Mrs. Fletcher, which were adapted into acclaimed HBO series. His new novel is Ghost Town.
And with him is Warren Zanes. He is the New York Times bestselling author of Petty, the biography. As a member of the Del Fuegos, he has shared the stage with Bruce Springsteen and continues to write and record music. His latest book, Deliver Me From Nowhere, The Making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, was recently adapted into a feature film starring Jeremy Allen White. Enjoy the conversation, and we'll be back after to fill you in on what's coming up in the store.
Hello, Tom Perrotta. It is so nice to see you.
You too, Warren. It's great to see you. I'm so pleased to be here and to talk about movies and adaptations, and especially the film made from your book, Deliver Me From Nowhere.
Yeah, I'll be frank. Since you have done a lot in the territory of adaptation, I view this as a bit of a therapy session. I've got a lot of questions for you, but this is all tied to my hometown independent bookstore. So having you come and visit Watchung Booksellers, which is just like walking distance from my house, that is also special. Now, I wanted to go back like how we met. I was piecing it together. And you correct me where my details are wrong, but this was in Massachusetts, outside of Boston. It was a fundraiser for a kind of halfway house for...
That's right.
The Joyce Linehan is the person who connected us was putting this on in the name of her mother, who started this men's halfway house shelter for men dealing with substance abuse issues, being worked back into the community. So there was like a great cause. At our table, I think the governor was there. I think George...
was he the governor yet? Or was he running? I can't remember.
He was so close. It's the closest I've ever got to anybody who could even use the word governor. Which to me made him a governor. But,
no, I think you're right. No, I think you're probably right about all these details.
And George Pelicanos was there.
That's right. Yeah.
So for me, I was sitting at a table, like the governor part, I was pretty impressed with, but to be sitting with quote, real writers, unquote, for me at that time was pretty heady stuff. I was still in a point where I would not call myself a writer.
Well, it's right. And I think, had you written the Dusty in Memphis book at that point?
I'd done Dusty in Memphis, and I'd done a 50 years of Warner Brothers records.
Mm-hmm. Right. But your, the Petty biography, which is really signaled your arrival as a major writer about music and popular culture, I think was still in the future. I don't even know if you had started it, but I thought of you as a musician and an academic. I saw you straddling those worlds, but I didn't think of you primarily as a writer, but now that's how I think of you.
Yeah. Well, it was a great moment for me to grapple with this. Am I a writer? And you went to Syracuse for creative writing?
That's correct. Yeah. I went to Syracuse at a kind of a golden age. So I went there to study with Raymond Carver.
Wow.
Who I idolized. I saw myself as this working class writer from New Jersey, and I really wanted to kind of explore that particular world. And Carver to me was a real guide to that. But unfortunately, Carver took some time off and then he got sick and I wasn't able to work with him. But one of the other teachers there was Tobias Wolff.
Yeah.
Who turned out to be just the perfect teacher for me at that time. And so I've been defining myself as a writer really since I was in high school, though the road not taken for me always was music. As you can see from my guitars back there, I really wanted to play. I just wasn't, I didn't feel like I had the level of natural talent for music that I felt a confidence when I was writing, so that was the main thing for me. Though I kept playing, I still play and I play. And
do you ever call yourself a musician?
Yeah, shyly. I've been playing in this dad band, and we play porch fests, and we do occasional gigs, and I feel like I've gotten a lot better in the past few years. But again, it's something I do as an amateur, and whereas writing is both a vocation and a career.
Yeah, but it's interesting to me when we take on these titles and when we don't, and in seeing my book about Springsteen's Nebraska being turned into a movie, I felt it again. Like, what am I? Am I? Because initially, when it was announced by 20th Century Studios, I was a producer, and that was my deal, and that became, through turns in the road, executive producer, which is a different thing. But
right.
But they both felt I was uneasy with the titles, and even at my advanced age, I'm okay with musician. If anything, I obscure the musician part because I think it won't get me into the room, to have a voice.
Did you feel like producer was like, it was an imposter syndrome thing or?
No, I was actually fighting for producer because at the front end of the project, I really I was deeply involved. And once it got to production, there were things that producers did, and there were some, there was some accountability on the movie company side of things, that if I was to be a producer, I had to do this, and my view of things was I already did enough work to justify that, and I had to yield in that struggle. And I did it comfortably, because the credits felt right. And but let me ask you one overarching thing. Because you've had books adapted, you've been involved as a screenwriter, You've been like with The Leftovers, you were way in the room on that as part of the entirety of the process. Do you have moments where you're yearning to be back by yourself at the desk? And when you're at the desk, do you have moments where you're yearning to be part of that team project? Because both have energies that are attractive.
Yeah, and I think anybody who's played in a band will understand, both the thrill of being part of a group to pursue some art form with other people is a real high, but it's also a real pain in the ass. And, sometimes you lose creative battles or you get sidelined or who knows what. There are lots of frustrations that come with it. I've enjoyed over the years this dialectic in my life of I'll spend a year or 2 years writing a book, and then I will be involved in an adaptation of it. And I've had a lucky streak of that over the past decade and a half. If I graphed it, I would say I went from no involvement at all on election, which I just turned over to some producers and they got it to Alexander Payne. And it became this wonderful movie it was just like a gift that was given to me, especially because my book had been pretty obscure. People didn't know about it. And then it became this movie that has since become kind of a cult thing. So that was one of those just amazing experiences. But at the same time, it introduced me to the world of filmmaking. And I had this feeling of like, oh, this is something that appeals to me. Like the first time I went to a set, there's this rhythm of like intense work, but then lots of downtime when you're waiting for, the lights to be set up or for, some actor to get out of makeup or whatever it is. And people are just talking and there's a kind of a social vibe to it. It just felt like a really cool place for me. And I wanted more of it. And I worked on the script of Little Children with Todd Field. And that's where I had the experience similar maybe to what you were talking about, where in the writing process, I'm sitting there with the director and we're working on every line and it feels like, oh, this is my movie. But as soon as it goes into production, I'm just back home and all this stuff is happening. Scenes are changing, in rehearsal. So when I saw the movie, it was like, even though I had written it with Todd, there were definitely things that were like entirely new that came out of his rehearsals with the actors. And then editing is this whole other thing with certain parts of our script, ended up on the cutting room floor just for time constraints.
I'm surprised that it was your book being adapted. You were in as a screenwriter and you weren't on the set.
It's not that usual to have a screenwriter on the set of a feature film, especially because Todd was the other screenwriter. And so I think felt like there was a writer, on the set, and I think it probably is a matter of, just a director's preference.
Yeah. And what do you know of that history of keeping the writer away from the set? Because I didn't know it, but I figured out that there was an energy around me as the writer of the book that some people were responding to that I didn't even know was attached to me.
An energy like they were excited or they were wary?
Wary. Like the writer equals the person who's going to try to protect one version of this story.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I totally get that. I think I think that has definitely been my experience. When I appeared on the set of Election and was introduced to Matthew Broderick as the writer of the novel, he just said, "There's a novel?"
Oh, when it comes to Election, I gotta ask, when you saw those Reese Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick performances in particular, Was that a thrill for you?
That was one of the great moments of my life. I have to say. I mean, I had dreamed about being a writer, and I had struggled up to that point in my career. And then this, unlikely thing happened. And, I just visited the set once, and I remember there's just this electricity on it because people were talking about Reese Witherspoon's performance as Tracy Flick. And they're like, you got to see this. You got to see this. And I, walked in and there it was. And you could feel the electricity. That was amazing and taught me something. I mean, I am, I think you have to give other artists a certain amount of leeway to do what they're going to do. But I agree with you that there is a kind of sometimes a wariness around the writer and a feeling that maybe you're going to judge or feel unhappy. And I certainly know a lot of writers who are unhappy with adaptations of their work.
Yeah.
I feel very lucky, and I think you had a wonderful movie made from the book. I know it's very different from some of what you did, and maybe we could talk a little.
Yeah.
About that.
I gotta pause though. I feel like it's important to say that Reese Witherspoon is under-discussed as a great actor, I think. And I can't remember the name of the coming-of-age movie that she did when she was quite young.
Oh, The Man on the Moon?
Yeah, The Man on the Moon. Just so different from the Tracy Flick character and so good. A
I
tight
agree.
movie.
Yeah, no, she is a wonderful actor, and she was at that point. She was probably, when I met her, just maybe 20, 22, something like that. And it's always startling to just see people who, I mean, she'd been working for a long time, and like musicians, actors are sometimes, fully formed in their early 20s. That's rarely the case for.
Yeah, no, that's that.
We need to grow into it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comparison point. When we think about the age of the Beatles, Paul's writing Eleanor Rigby, and it's just shocking. That's coming out of a young person.
I know, it really is this. I remember reading about, the two of them like on a school bus or something, sitting there face to face with their guitars, writing songs that we still sing, and they were just teenagers.
Yeah. Writers are supposed to have long white beards by the time of their first decent work. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I love hearing your description of that first experience. And that feels close to my experience, with the difference of I was on the set the whole time.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. I'll tell you the process. So it came to me first from a producer, not to Bruce and John Landau. And, in talking with this producer, Eric Robinson, he thought there was a movie there. And I never would have thought of this book that it could become a movie. That never crossed my mind. And I quickly told him that if Warren Zanes was what he had nothing. Because he needed life rights from Bruce Springsteen, and he needed to clear music. And that was Sony. And these are two big entities. And I said, nonetheless, here is my Venmo, and I'll take that option money. and the good fortune there is that put me in at the beginning of the process. And when they asked me to go to Bruce Springsteen and John Landau, I said, no, I won't do it unless you have someone attached who they would know and respect. Then it's credible. Otherwise, it's just us. And we're not the first. And if Bruce Springsteen wanted a movie, it would have happened. So they went, Ellen Goldsmith Vane had gotten Scott Cooper's email by mistake. She had been copied on something she wasn't intended to be copied on. Sent him just a 2-line email, and he wrote back almost immediately, Nebraska is one of my favorite records. They set up a dinner for me and Scott, and then Scott and I wrote a 1-page description of what a movie could be. I sent it to John Landau, and next thing was Scott and I drove down to the Jersey Shore, and the 4 of us, John, Bruce, Scott, me, sat, talked about movies, then talked about the possibility of this movie. And then Scott took months writing a screenplay, but we were talking every day. And I knew he's a writer director, so I understood I'm not coming in as a screenwriter, but I knew I wanted to make myself available and not be protective and not fight for credits, but just to be a good thing in his experience. Mm-hmm. And we ended up with a real friendship. And I felt like as a younger person, I probably would have fucked this up. But I really had to go in with the win is my book being turned into a movie. Don't fight for more. Be a helping presence. Don't guard the story. And that made it a really great experience. And so, it was just Scott and I talking script for months.
I'm so glad to hear. I mean, I think you really were acting in the best way as a producer, because that is one of those amorphous terms. Like you can be a producer by providing funds. You can be a producer by, acquiring an intellectual property. You can be a producer by, helping to bring an actor on board. But it sounds like you were doing a really useful thing aside from, providing the source material, which is another. I mean, that you've got to say, no matter what, that's. I don't know what percentage, but it's a big percentage of the movie. And I know when I've been on sets, the crew members, if they knew that I had written the source material, they had a very particular thing they would say to me. They'd say, "Great story." And there was just a sense like a story is a part of the movie process, but so is the production. So it's the post-production, it was like you do your thing the same way a bass player's, putting down that backbeat.
I'll tell you, the thing I heard was, we wouldn't be here without you. Mm-hmm. And I was like, was everybody given that line to say to me? I started to get a little suspicious. But it's one of those funny things where I go like, I'm not going to take that, because behind me is this album, Nebraska. And it's like, I just can't, I'm not comfortable with that. And behind Nebraska is a guy named Bruce Springsteen. So sure, we wouldn't be here without me, but we wouldn't be here without the catering truck.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Well, you're modest in a very appealing way, because it's hard not to take that compliment. But I hear you. I mean, I think there's something different about being a biographer, because obviously you're writing from somebody else's experience. Can I ask, did you know Bruce and John Landau at the point that you met? Because you had written a book about him.
Yeah. So the Nebraska book starts with when Bruce got on stage with my old band,
the
Del
right.
Fuegos. But that was what we can measure that one in minutes. But its impact couldn't be measured in minutes. I mean, really, he was touring Born in the USA. Just weeks before he went and did We Are the World, he was in Greensboro, North Carolina in the Rhinoceros Club doing a Del Fuego show.
Nice.
And as I mentioned in the book, every interview we did for the next 2 years, the first question was, what was it like to play with Bruce Springsteen? He was just, he was up there in the heavens and at a level few get to. And so the impact of that was tremendous. And then, you know, when I was working at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I tried to get him to be part of a Lead Belly week that I was putting on. And he couldn't do it. You know, that's actually where Robert Plant, Nelson Krauss performed together for the first time.
Wow.
And Harry Belafonte, Odetta, Clarence Gatemouth Brown, Los Lobos. It was like an incredible week honoring Lead Belly. And 2 months after that, I go down to the mailroom and the guy who sorts the mail said, "Hey, you got a letter from Rumson, New Jersey." And like, all you had to say is Rumson, New Jersey. And like, you knew who it was from. And it was this really nice note, like, just sorry I couldn't be a part of the Lead Belly show. You know, I still remember your old band. All the best, Bruce.
Wow.
And it's like, wow. And then when I was running Little Stevens Foundation, we went to Jimmy Iovine's house in LA for a screening of Scorsese's Stones movie. And there was a dinner before, and Bruce was there, and Steven was there, and Jimmy, the head of Paramount. Will.i.am came for dessert. You know, one of these situations where I'm the pool boy. But it was amazing. So there were these few points of intersection. But when I wrote that book about Nebraska, I guess one thing I didn't realize was that I'd kind of really parked my car behind Bruce's house. I knew what Nebraska meant to me. I came to find out what it meant to him. And that put me in his orbit in such a way that, you know, I was the one introducing Scott Cooper to Bruce Springsteen. You know, what an enviable position. I really liked. I thought Crazy Heart was a really good portrait of a singer-songwriter, and I think that's, for whatever reason, you tell me why musicians are so hard to get into a credible movie. I don't know why it is, but it's tough.
It's a strange thing. I mean, part of it is, of course, you have a musician who is a performer, and now you're having another performer play that person, and you have to then decide, how are we going to reproduce this music? You know, and everybody takes, you know, different turns. I mean, I thought in the Dylan movie, you know, Timothy Chalamet was a surprisingly good musician. But boy, you know, it's tough to do an imitation of Bob Dylan, you know,
Yeah.
and there's something alienating about it. I mean, I found that movie also to be really interesting and watchable. And I love this one too, but these are about performers that I love and you know, moments in their careers that are, you know, very fraught. And I really love this recent turn toward not doing the whole, you know, lifespan of the musician, but really focusing on these pivotal moments. I think there's a possibility of a deep dive and a kind of connection between audience and performer that is deeper than you might get from a sweeping kind of biopic.
Yeah. When I did a CBS Sunday morning episode with Bruce when the book came out. And in that interview, he said, you know, 50 years from now, if there's one thing you're going to look at to get a sense of who Bruce Springsteen was, probably be Nebraska. And
yeah, well, that moment in the movie when he's got the legal pad and he's got these songs over here that are Nebraska and these songs over here that are born in the USA. And you're just like, it's just kind of awe-inspiring, that this young guy was just writing these songs in this concentrated period. It feels Beatles-esque almost.
Yeah. I didn't know the degree to which he was holding those two things. And it was my first interview with John Landau where he said he had his art movie and his Star Wars at the same time. And he chose his art movie. And it's so, for any creator, I think that's a pretty compelling moment.
Yeah. Did the record company know that he had Born in the U.S.? Well, they knew some of those songs, right?
Not really. I mean, at that point, he's record company involvement often diminishes as the artist establishes themselves. At the beginning, the A&R person typically signs the artist and they have some degree of oversight. They're shepherding this artist into territories that the artist hasn't experienced yet. So they're close. But when you're coming off, record number 5, verse number 1, I would say no, they didn't know. And it probably wouldn't have helped them to know because they would have been feverish.
Yeah.
With little children, can you talk to me about how that process? So this is your first time as one of, in a screenwriting duo. How did that work?
That was a great experience, I have to say. And you never know. I mean, any collaboration, you walk in and you meet somebody who you don't know. I mean, Todd Field, the director and co-writer of Little Children, was so collaborative. And I remember just the first day, we're sitting down in a hotel room in Boston. We have his laptop in front of us. And I said to him, like, where are we going to start? And he just picked up the book and said, page 1. And we really did just move through the book. We kind of followed the structure that was there. He brought this conceit that there would be a disembodied narrator kind of floating above the story. It was a voiceover, but not from a character. And it really was the voice of the book. It allowed us to bring in chunks of the book, though in a slightly different form. That was a wonderful collaborative experience.
Can I ask you, did that voice, a somewhat omniscient voice, did that make you feel more represented as the writer?
Well, it did be, the weird thing was Election also had all this voiceover that brought in some language from the book. So I felt, I think more than most writers, that my voice and my structural choices in the book were respected and reproduced in those two films. Whereas I had a very different experience with The Leftovers, where I was writing in a team and I was, obviously one of the executive producers and somebody with a strong voice in that. But Damon Lindelof was the showrunner, and he had a kind of, a desire to depart from the book a little bit. And that for the first season, that was pretty rough for me because I felt like, whoa, there are these parts of the book and we need to get them into our show. And he was, kind of bringing in new material. That was a much more collaborative experience ultimately in the best sense of the word, because that show got wild in a way that, that wasn't my instinct to make it wild like that. I had written a kind of a quiet post-apocalyptic book that was about grief and about, bewilderment. And Damon and the other writers started to turn it into this, kind of surrealist, shamanistic book that just went into wild places like alternative worlds, possibly, purgatory. It was, that thing where you just feel like, oh, I started this, but it became something that I never could have imagined it would be. So that's another kind of version of collaboration.
But in that, there's an in-between space where what these collaborators are envisioning has not yet been realized, but yours has been realized. Was that an uneasy passage?
Yes, it was. And in fact, we had fought bitterly about this one particular scene where there's a character, Nora, played by the amazing actress Carrie Coon. And she has this weird ritual where she hires prostitutes to shoot her while she's wearing a bulletproof vest. And it just seemed so insane to me. And I just thought, like, this isn't the way that I treated these characters in my book. They were treated with a certain kind of somber dignity. And here she's just doing this wild, like, fetishistic thing. And then I saw it produced, and it was so weird and great. And what the actress did with it was so great. And I just finally started to trust Damon and the other writers. I'm like, okay, I think they're seeing some possibility in this story that, I had not been aware of. And it was opening up and allowing, like, actors to do wild things that were strangely moving, and so it really took me like a full year once we started to see what was happening on set for me to realize, like, oh, some of these things that I was arguing against are actually really great and kind of pointing the direction for a much wilder show.
So for me, part of that is just the wonder of art. It's not actually the strength of any single collaborator, whether it's a fellow writer or an actor. But, Donald Barthelme wrote an essay, I think it was called Not Knowing, just about you start writing something, you don't know where it's going. But as a writer of a work being adapted, to be in the not knowing and not just trusting your collaborators, but trusting, well, art needs to be a little bit lost before it gets found. And I'm going to have the humility in relation to art, not other humans, to see where this goes and not sound the alarm too early.
Yeah. I did an event with the great writer, Kazuo Ishiguro, who wrote The Remains of the Day.
That was my book, Tom. That's the book I chose.
Oh, amazing. Well, let me just say, that film was so faithful to the work in just this beautiful way. It really, it's a very quiet film, and things are happening under the surface. And, we were talking about film adaptation, and I was talking a little bit about The Leftovers and how it kind of became something that I couldn't have anticipated. And that part of the experience for me was adjusting my own expectations and accepting, like, that it had been transformed, and that I actually found my way to loving this transformation. And I think he said, but wasn't that humiliating? Because you talked about, that it's like a humble state. You think you own something, and then you're sharing it. And in some ways it becomes, briefly unrecognizable to you. And there was a lot of self-doubt in me and mixed feelings. Now I have no mixed feelings at all about The Leftovers. I fully embrace its wonderfulness, because I think it really is an amazing show. But it was a humbling experience along the way. Sometimes to have people telling you, we know better than you what you were doing.
Yeah.
The story you told.
But sitting here today, having gone through it and being on the other side, you feel respected as a writer when it comes to The Leftovers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I imagine it's like being in a band and finding like, okay, I have to play a role in this band, or here I am with my acoustic guitar singing these songs, and then I'm going to play these same songs in a band, and they have a much bigger sound, and that was actually the story of Nebraska, right? It's like, is it just going to be this one guy's vision, or is it going to be this thing that is defined by this great band that he's put together, but that makes it different?
Yeah. That's why it helped me to go to the art part of it, because in talking with Springsteen, it really was this cassette tape that had these songs. It kept talking to him and telling him, that's not me, that is me. And he had the capacity to, you can't hear it directly. Cassettes don't actually talk. But he was tuned in enough and he had enough humility to be able to assess and then go against the marketplace, which that can't, to me, be understated, the choice that Springsteen made. That thing did not sound like the music on the charts then, 10 years before, 10 years after. It is an anomaly. Mm-hmm. And he went with it because the art was saying, I need to be this.
I think that Jeremy Allen White's performance of that particular, like the anguish of, it's like he knows this is a kind of a perverse decision, but it's all he can do. And there was just some heartfelt quality in the acting in those scenes that I think was truly convincing, especially when he's with John Landau, because obviously they have a shared vision, or they had a shared vision for his career and how to, make him get as big as possible without sacrificing artistic integrity. And now even Landau's not sure, and those scenes are, I think, quite remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, and I think you frame it exactly right there. They had a shared vision, and now Landau comes into this moment where good management for this particular artist requires going through a moment where they don't share a vision. And his job is to support this guy and go with this decision that the artist has made and is obviously sticking to. But I'll tell you something, like in interviews, talking with Bruce about Nebraska and going, what was happening when you tried to re-record them? What was going wrong? He would say, I was losing my characters. And this is actually like at the heart of our theme of adaptation. What you were just describing with The Leftovers, like it was going somewhere that it wasn't in the tea leaves of the book itself. It was going to a new place. And the risk was you losing your characters. And it's super interesting, like to walk that line of like, I might not have enough to go on to trust these people, but the only other way to go is like back into my book and be the writer who defends it. Like I might just have to sit in this area of discomfort for a while, see where this goes, and trust that art often, but not always, finds its way.
Yeah, no, that was the thing. You're right. You talk about that not knowing. It's like, are we going off the rails? And I can watch the first couple of episodes of The Leftovers and feel like this teetering, like, we almost took a very wrong turn, and then we kind of, adjusted the trajectory a little bit. And there was just this constant sort of fine tuning. I feel like it took us, a half a season really to find this true new path.
But you have had moments when you are on a set in a writer's room and you feel like, my God, I want to be back by myself in my office.
Well, for me, I was telling you earlier, I had gone from, no participation in election to, by the time my book, Mrs. Fletcher, became a TV show, I was the showrunner, and I was on set every day. And I was in the editing room every day. And so I was like completely in charge of that. I had, in effect, become, a filmmaker in a way that up to that point, I had just been a collaborator. And then suddenly I was the person, making the decisions. And it was overwhelming, to be a showrunner meant I had all these relationships to manage. I was answering, to the network constantly. I had, we'd be on set making one episode, and then we'd be writing another episode and getting notes on a different, it was just so much to juggle. And when that was done and I came home, this was like 2019, and I just was like, I'm so glad to just be a writer alone in a room again. And so that was, and now I'm starting to feel itchy to get back into it.
Yeah.
So that's how it is. Especially as you get older, I think they're just physical demands, that are different when you're making films, just because it's a high pressure business. Whereas, being a novelist, there's pressure and there's all kinds of difficulties, but it's generally speaking, not so stressful and leaves a lot more time for quiet reflection.
I'm a great believer in the diverse portfolio. To be, I count one of my, great good fortunes that I've been able to be in the classroom as a professor. That my rock and roll band is playing in December, and it's going to be me, a Telecaster, and a Fender amp. That I can be a writer, that I've had these opportunities to be on sets, work on documentaries. It's not, I don't not take credit for getting into those situations, but there's a lot of good fortune involved. And I love to move between them because I also think they cross-fertilize. So when I go back to sitting by myself, something I've learned in those group processes is informing my experience of solo work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And we were talking earlier about, do you then start to think, okay, what would this book be like as a film? I try to keep that out of my mind. I try to treat each of these activities as separate artistic enterprises, but every now and then I do feel my screenwriting mind, bleeding into my novel writing mind. It's certainly, I notice in my most recent book that's coming out in April, I wrote in short chapters, and I felt like that was informed a little bit by screenwriting in the way that one scene moves into another, and that there's a certain kind of rhythm and speed that you can get if you work in short bits rather than in long bits.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Well, what much more to be said. So we got to do this again over a pot of coffee. But we were asked to choose books, and I cannot believe that you brought up Remains of the Day. But because I that's a book I love. I love the voice. It was, it was like the Shaker furniture of voice, strong, simple. I felt so close to the character, and then the film felt like such a good and strong adaptation. And was willing to engage subtlety and quiet, and had an actor who could transmit a lot of inner pathos with very little facial recognition, but the seas, the turbulent seas underneath were just, woof, it's heartbreaking at times. And the heartbreak of the book transmitted. So that's my recommendation to whoever's listening out there is read Remains of the Day. And then I'll second watch.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny that you recommend a novel and I'll recommend a music biography, because I think we're living in a kind of a golden age of music biography. And interestingly, some of them are written by musicians. Somebody we both know, Bill Janovitz from Boston, wrote I thought a wonderful biography of Leon Russell. And I'll recommend that book. Leon Russell's one of those figures who in some ways is obscure. Like I think if I mentioned him to my kids, they would not know who he was, but this biography places him squarely in the middle of this golden age of American music, where he's playing in the Wrecking Crew and playing on, so many of the greatest records that happened in the 60s, and, created a whole style of rock and roll piano that I think is, Elton John kind of took it and ran with it, but you still hear it. And he's a weird dude as well. So it had some of that just, wow, this guy is a very strange American individual, when people are weirder than they are now.
Yeah. When I was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I was really trying to make a case for him. I mean, the museum didn't have anything to do with the inductions. But one way of increasing visibility within that wider community was bring the artist into the museum, do some programming. And so I had contact, and I was like, we almost need to establish, just like the platypus has its own kind of category because it doesn't fit anywhere. I'm like, we need the platypus category for Leon Russell because he does so many things, yet doesn't belong squarely in any one category. Songwriter, producer, performer, and Leon Russell didn't buy it for a second. I couldn't get him in. He just felt like he wasn't respected as he should have been. And I agreed fully, but we had different strategies for how to address that. Mine was through programming. His was through saying, fuck you people.
Two different approaches.
But hey, Tom, thank you for visiting my home here. And, I've admired you for many years. And you are a storyteller that, I look at your career and I go, no mistake that people want to turn those books into movies because they are halfway there already.
Well, thanks, man. I really admire your work too. And I love both Deliver Me From Nowhere and the Tom Petty biography, which I also think is part of this golden age that I'm talking about. I think that was a remarkable book.
Well, thanks, man. And let's do it again and go take a day by yourself at your desk.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing you somewhere soon.
All right, man. Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom and Warren, for coming on to talk with us about adaptations. We can't wait to have you together in person on Saturday, May 2nd. Listeners, you can find ticket links and information about any of the books they discussed on our website and show notes.
Next Tuesday, April 28th, we welcome Mark Oppenheimer, author of Judy Blume, A Life, with Jay Michelson. And on Thursday, April 30th, we welcome debut author Jill Rosenberg to discuss her book of short stories, Now I'm Photogenic and Other Stories I Tell Myself, with novelist Marcy Dermansky.
And don't forget to sign up for our live podcast recording on Thursday, May 7th. We'll be talking about The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante with authors Alice Elliott Dark and Dagmara Dominczyk, who was actually in the film adaptation of the book. Tickets include a copy of the book, plus drinks and snacks, good times, so sign up now so that you have a chance to read it before the event.
Also, the Montclair Literary Festival schedule is up. Grab a copy from the bookstore or our website to find out about all the amazing author events happening.
You can get details and tickets for all of our events, story times, and book clubs through our newsletter, show notes, or at watchungbooksellers.com.
The Watchung Booksellers Podcast is produced by Kathryn Counsell and Marnie Jessup, and it's recorded at Watchung Booksellers in Montclair, New Jersey. The show is edited by Kathryn Counsell, and original music is composed and performed by Violet Mujica. Research and show notes by Caroline Shurtleff. Thank you to the staff at Watchung Booksellers and the Kids Room for all their hard work and love of books.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoy the show, please like, follow, and share it. You can follow us on social media at Watchung Booksellers. And if you have any questions or ideas, you can reach us at wbpodcast@watchungbooksellers.com.
We'll see you next time. Until then, for the love of books, keep reading.